Nornavio, docked to Macha's Lagrange 5 anchorage. "I bet they're happily enjoying all sorts of exquisite foods and drinks down there," Leopold said, idly scratching his scar as he stared at Macha off in the distance from the observation deck of the monumental anchorage station. Beside him, his teammates and several other personnel ate standard rations, gambled, drank, or chatted. "Do you not pay any attention whatsoever to what I say?" Gregor asked, before taking a sip from a flask he was holding. "Only when you say something half worthwhile, Blue Blood," Leopold replied with a small smirk. Gregor took another sip and Raquel took over. "Leopold, what makes you think they are preoccupied with eating good food and drinks?" "The party," Leopold replied. "Did you see Wyatt? Man, I couldn't have held to that thing if I'd tried with so many blue bloods around me." No offense, Raquel," he was quick to add. "After the procession, they're going to a party, right? Lucky Wyatt. And here we are, stuck on this station while he gets to eat, drink, and hang around beautiful ladies. Worst shore leave ever," the pilot complained. Raquel's mouth opened, and she turned to Gregor with an expression that read, "Is he serious?" The shorter man nodded in response while Nultar watched with a wide, impish smile. "You are so clueless despite your abilities," she lamented, closing her eyes in disappointment. Leopold pointed a finger at himself. "Commoner, remember? So what? They're not down there preening their feathers and stuffing their faces like most nobles do?" Raquel reopened her eyes and asked, "Where were you born, Leopold?" "Rastugi, all the way from Ishtal territory," he said with no small amount of pride. "Too bad they sided with traitors, but hey, that gives me a good reason to kick Blue Blood some ass, eh?" "Rastugi. Ah, no wonder your views on nobility are so terrible. The decadent House Bitofo controls that planet, if I recall correctly." "That's them, all right. I swear they spend half the year throwing parties and eating everything that moves. I know other nobles aren't like those bastards, but come on," Leopold replied, ending with a chuckle. "And I've already told you that House Bitofo reviled even among other houses. It is their position and control of resources that has kept them in their position, not to mention their loyalty to House Ishtal as one of their banners, Leopold," Gregor added. "Contrary to your experiences, noble parties are anything but. A party that's not a party where you get to dance, sing, and drink until you forget how to walk?" "Pfft, yeah, I believe you," Leopold replied in a joking tone, but at the silence of his three comrades, his expression turned more serious. "Wait, that's a real thing? How?" "Because, Leo, noble parties, get-togethers, and other such wonderful opportunities to mingle are excuses to do what most nobles love doing more than anything, playing their silly little games of power, influence, and skullduggery," Nultar said, experience dripping from each word he spoke. "Oh, sure, there's fine food, drink, and entertainment, but the real prize is to make connections, find out weaknesses from rivals, plant false evidence on your enemies, spread lies and rumors, meet new blood, see what chances are present to form new alliances or strengthen already existing ones, or just kiss a truly monumental amount of ass." "Could you please not be so crude in front of a lady?" Gregor asked, eyes narrowing. "I don't need you to speak on my behalf, Gregor. If such talk irritates me, I will make my discomfort known swiftly through my own voice or my fist," Raquel said, earning a roll of the eyes from Gregor before he sipped from his flask again. "Nultar is correct, Leopold. That's what Lieutenant Wyatt is doing right now along with Commander Redford, Her Majesty, Princess Clara, and Lady Cynthia. They're not there to have a good time, Leopold. They are on a battlefield that I wish never to partake in again." Leopold winced. "Forget anything I said, then. I'd rather stay here. Speaking of which, why are we here? The rest of the damn fleet is spread across 3 other anchorages, but not a single other ship is here." "It is not for us to know. Princess Clara ordered we would dock here, and here we are," Nultar said with a shrug. "Besides, it isn't too bad. Everyone got paid plus a small bonus. Even the recruits from Woodshaft got an initial payment. So all of us get to enjoy ourselves for however long the princess plans to stay. Speaking of that, what are you drinking, Gregor?" Gregor swallowed his latest sip and raised an eyebrow. "Wine," he replied nonchalantly. "I thought you hated alcoholic beverages," Leopold asked, confused. "I'm the one that loves getting shit-faced around here." "My implants can handle it. It has a low volume," Gregor answered, taking another sip. "It helps me focus and think clearly." "Think about what?" Leopold asked. Wyatt's words, actions, and how is it possible for a commoner to be such a masterful deceiver and planner? Gregor replied, closing his flask. Did you hit your head or something, Gregor? Leopold asked, concerned. Raquel crossed her arms and hummed deeply. So you've noticed it too, Undaj? What about you, Okara? I have my doubts, but I can't see any other reason, Noltar replied. Leopold stared at the three of them for several seconds, mouth agape and completely bewildered. What, in the prince's name, are you three talking about? You can't be that stupid, Leopold, Gregor began. The prince relied on him to root out the conspirators within his circle. He relied on him. A royal put his trust in a mere commoner? A laughable proposition. Not only that, but he has gained the trust of Princess Clara. Lady Cynthia, a bloody Winfield, is personally training him. Why? How? And Commander Redford gave him the right to choose his teammates for his named fighter squadron, Noltar continued. A commoner is a commoner, after all. Wyatt Staples can't possibly be just a commoner. He has placed himself squarely within Princess Clara's entourage, perhaps even within her inner circle. The thought alone makes me uneasy, Raquel added, eyes narrowing. And his words during our second day of training, they sounded so sincere. I believed him. But it can't be true. It just can't. Leopold stared at his companions one at a time, waiting, praying, hoping to see them crack a smile, a smirk, anything. But as seconds passed, a choked, rasping groan of disbelief escaped his throat. Guys, Wyatt isn't some sort of mastermind, didn't you hear him? He fucked up, simple as. He was going through a damn panic attack. I know I talk a lot of shit about nobles and your privileged positions, but I don't know if I could have handled being elevated the way he was. You're simply naive, Leo, Gregor continued, lamenting the ignorance of his friend and teammate. The disastrous day prior and his apology were but a test. A ruse, if you will. He was testing us and our resolve. We passed. Barely, I fear. He's been testing our weaknesses and strengths, measuring us, to see if we are worth our standing. He has given us ample room to voice our opinions and doesn't belittle our failings. He's unlike other team leaders and officers I've served under. It is disconcerting how different he is, Raquel seconded, as Noltar nodded in agreement. Paradoxical, approachable, talented, and has the aptitudes of a great squadron leader, perhaps more. Yet he is humble and shows no interest in furthering his position and influence. Then again, he has the attention of the prince himself and the ear of Princess Clara. How much higher can you truly go than that? You three, Leopold said, barking a laugh, have gone insane. Wyatt was a gosh darn compost hauler. He named his squadron composters for crying out loud. Yeah, he saved Princess Clara and he's done some pretty insane stuff, but that doesn't mean he's been planning all of this from the start. Do you honestly think that Wyatt Staples, the man that barked at the command of 3 blue bloods? Yeah, I was there when it happened. Would be this crazy mastermind all of a sudden? Then how do you explain everything he's done? Very few nobles would even consider admitting to having failed in their tasks, let alone apologize to their subordinates the way he's done. It's as if he has no concept of pride and honor, Raquel questioned. That's because he wasn't a noble until recently, morons, Leopold cried out. You're seeing censor ghosts where there are none. Wyatt is earnest and honest. Too honest, in fact. And he ain't a backstabbing prick like most nobles are. He ain't waiting to use us for his benefit or test us for some confounded reason. He's just trying to do his best in a position he never wanted in the first place. At least I know I wouldn't want to be a bloody noble. No offense. Whatever the case may be, Noltar said in an uncharacteristic serious tone, you cannot deny that every circumstance surrounding him is beyond the norm. Is he really who he claims to be, or have we just seen the man he wants us to see? You are all crazy, Leopold said, exasperated. You'll see I'm right. Wyatt may be a noble now, but he is a commoner at heart. He may change in time, but he's not a shadowy mastermind, he said, and turned his attention back to Matcha. I really wanted to go and meet up a few girls, though. On that, Leo, we can agree, Noltar said. His usual jovial tone returned. Raquel glared at the two while Gregor took another sip from his flask, his eyes narrowing as he, too, stared at the distant planet. Matcha, capital world of House Finnegan, Grand Palace. After the ceremony ended with the closing words of the prince proclaiming that Duke Draymore would be defeated and that the fight had just begun, the already large room began to move and shift. The walls opened up, pillars rose from the ground, and a horde of servants came through to place tables, chairs, cloths, and a plethora of utensils all over the expanding room, now easily 3 times as spacious. The prince rose once the servants were done, placing countless trays filled with foods he'd never seen before, exquisite dishes, extravagant drinks, and lavishly decorated plates, silverware, and glasses. He thanked Marchioness Amelia Finnegan, vowing to reward her loyalty once the conflict was over, and then the party began. As a commoner who had been neither rich nor poor, he'd been to a few parties before that fateful encounter with the Drazen. Those had always been quaint little affairs. A few friends gathered here, some family members there, good friends and neighbors coming together, pulling their resources together to have an enjoyable evening or night. His favorite party was when he turned 13, 1 year before he enlisted in the Royal Navy Academy. His mother, bless her heart, had knitted him a scarf. Weskel kept half the carcass of a Clixel that the guild misplaced for a feast that day. Wham giving him a new carving knife he made himself, his always supportive father hugging him tightly. The laughter they enjoyed that day, discovering he had the dancing skills of a gala, Mr. Warlow coming over to give them some of his stew and give him a fresh batch of painting pencils and paint. Their always cheerful neighbor, Wuzka, joining in with some toasted beans and lachoa, and the Lumen family sharing their homemade cider. That had been a good day. The memory brought a smile to his face, especially when he compared it to the party unfolding before him. There was music played by very talented musicians, slow, mellow melodies that were always in the background and never loud enough to obscure anything but the quietest of whispers. Groups of nobles had formed everywhere around tables or standing in circles. Some even walked in pairs of small groups, mingling between themselves. The smell of the food was mixed with the pungent fragrance of perfumes and luxury oils he never knew existed. There were laughs and chuckles, giggles and dignified snorts, and it all felt so fake and boring that Wyatt had to try with every fiber of his body to not yawn. And here I thought I knew what boredom was like, hauling compost from station to station, planet to planet, and system to system. This could be classified as torture. No, it is torture. I rather receive an extra session of Cynthia's training over dealing with this. Am I going insane? Wyatt thought as he stood next to Clara's left side while Cynthia stood on her right. The princess was sitting on the table that the prince, the Marchioness, and her 2 oldest sons had been occupying not too long ago. They had moved to mingle with the gathered noble groups, leaving Clara with 3 other members of House Finnegan to deal with. 2 of the Marchioness's daughters and her oldest unmarried nephew. They were talking about economics, mercantile deals, the strain the Duke's treachery put on several systems, possible alliances, and other topics that he simply couldn't wrap his head around. At least, not fully. And through it all, he noticed, Clara's expression remained unchanged. Ever polite and approachable, but cold as ice. "Is that why I've yet to see Frederick Anderson, the scandal? A treacherous weasel he be?" asked Anna, if he remembered correctly. "Quite so. He was a traitor. Rest assured he is in captivity and his secrets are being extracted. He is stubborn, but we already knew that," Clara replied, with complete naturality. "She's such a great liar. If I didn't know that the traitor was dead and gone, I would believe her," Wyatt thought, and paid more attention to the conversation, eager to finally be able to stave off his boredom. Unlike House Anderson, the wretches, House Finnegan knows what loyalty is, and we stand with our beloved Majesty, the Prince, your Highness, said Hekatok with zeal and bravado. Duke Cornelius Draymore has forgotten his place and will be deposed. Victory will never be his. It nearly was. Blue blood, Wyatt thought grimly. Clara nodded. Indeed he will. Then she sighed tiredly. Just thinking about all the reforms, purges, elevations, degradations, investigations, and trials that will follow my uncle's defeat is tiring. Rest assured, those loyal will be recognized. Wyatt sincerely hoped that was the case, that Duke Draymore would be defeated. As the 2 Finnegan women brought up fans to cover their faces, as they giggled in approval and Hekatok proclaimed his undying loyalty for the umpteenth time, The pilot couldn't help but notice a few oddities around him. Firstly, behind the Finnegan women stood 4 maids, all beautiful with cybernetic eyes. Were the Finnegans so powerful that they could afford to have other nobles as servants? Even so, these maids wore fine-looking dresses, and not only them, almost every lady present wore dresses that were so extravagant that it hurt to look at them. If there was a word that could describe it, that would be gaudy. The lords were no better. While not as extravagant, their formal attires were borderline distasteful with how many adornments they had on them. Some even wore the most colorful outfits he'd ever seen, coming in bright yellows, oranges, and blues. What made it worse was that he was certain those clothes had to be expensive. Clothing choices aside, his greatest concern was the ladies. Not a single lady present wasn't shadowed by at least 2 maids. Even Amelia Finnegan was followed closely by 3 of them. All of them had maids. So where are Clara's maids? As a princess, she should have plenty of maids at her service. They should be here like they've always... Wait, I've never seen any of them since I met her, now that I think about it. She's only ever accompanied by Cynthia. There were at least over 200 survivors from the royal yacht, yet none of them were Clara's maids or servants. Did they die? Were they captured or left behind? Wyatt pondered as the realization manifested in his mind. Now that he was fully awake, the other oddities became bigger problems. The prince was constantly assaulted by other nobles wishing to either extend a cordial greeting or establish a brief conversation with him or those closest to him, like Juliana and Redford. The same happened with Amelia Finnegan and a bunch of other nobles of renown present, such as George Lintar, Lukacs Ishtal, William Hemstroke, Vivian Taravis, and Hannah Talaro, plus many more he had never met before. But Clara was being actively avoided. Looking closer at the 3 Finnegan present, he was now able to see their unease. The fidgeting, the nervousness in their movements, the repeated proclamations of loyalty to the prince and House Astor. It was clear that they didn't want to be there, but were either forced or ordered to remain at her side. Most of all, he noticed the fear in their eyes. Fear directed at Clara. "Wyatt, the lady in the red dress is going to pretend to fall as she walks past you. Do not move to aid her." The voice of Clara was clear in his mind, breaking him out of his stupor just in time to see the aforementioned lady, and his heart skipped a beat. To call what she was wearing scandalous would be an understatement. The red, vibrant dress she was wearing was skin-tight, denoting her curvaceous figure, a rather generous cleavage of her bosom, and an equally vibrant red hair that shone against the light illuminating the room. She was breathtakingly beautiful, he had to admit. But just as Clara had warned, the moment she passed next to him, she suddenly lost her step and let out a soft gasp as she fell forward. Wyatt's first instinct was to rush and prevent the red-haired woman from falling face first onto the ground, but obeying Clara's command, he forced himself to remain still as a statue, only his eyes following her as she fell. Before her balance was completely lost, she miraculously regained her footing and unfurled a fan, covering half her face behind it. "My, how silly of me. It seems I must have tasted too much wine. Apologies, my princess. I did not wish to inconvenience you," the red-haired quickly apologized. "Pay it no heed. Mind your drinks, though. A lady must not embarrass herself," Clara replied, her mask unwavering. Of course, of course. Excuse me, my princess, for I believe my brother is calling," she said, excusing herself as she quietly left, followed by 3 maids and swaying her hips a bit more than what was necessary. What in the world was that all about? Wyatt thought to himself, but quickly remembered the warning Clara and Cynthia had given him. As he focused on the red-haired woman, she made a turn a few tables over and moved her fan away, partially revealing her face, which was, unsurprisingly, showing the frustration someone showed when a plan was foiled. "As delightful as your company is," Clara said, and his attention was back on her. "I'm afraid I wish to take a stroll through the gardens. I shall come back before the feast begins. Do not worry, I have informed my brother already." "Feast? All of the food here, and this isn't the feast yet?" Wyatt thought as a void appeared in his stomach at the idea of so much being wasted. The food and drinks had barely been touched, and yet there was to be more. What sort of twisted joke of a nightmare was he going through? In a not-so-subtle hurry, the 3 Finnegans left the table, excusing themselves while Clara held out her hands. At the same time, he and Cynthia gently held her hand and helped her up to her feet. Wyatt moved the chair back, giving her ample room to walk, and silently followed her alongside Cynthia. As they walked, he noticed the frightened glances, the hostile yet chastened glares, and the way nobles subtly moved out of her way, afraid to come anywhere near her. As they exited the grand hall, the trip made their way to the garden outside where several other nobles were also making use of. The moment they saw them, however, they moved away, or hurriedly rushed back to the grand hall, muttering a weak "Your Highness" if they passed too close to them. Cynthia, stoic and unflinching as ever, never reacted while Clara replied with nods and polite waves of her hand to anyone brave enough to utter a word. It didn't take long for them to find a quiet place far removed from the music and nosy nobles. Sitting at the edge of a fountain, Clara let out a deep sigh and her mask finally fell off, revealing a tiredness that had been concealed for far too long. "Insulting, honorless, misbegotten snakes," Cynthia finally made her voice known, deep and grumbling, "acting as if we could not see them. My princess, you do not deserve such treatment." "We both know they would never see me any other way, Cynthia. But your words are appreciated, my dearest friend," Clara replied before straining her neck to the side until a gentle pop was heard. "Politics. So tiresome." "That's what that party is all about?" Wyatt asked, softly. "I would hardly call that a party. Perhaps a banquet or a lavish social gathering could be a more apt descriptor," Clara replied, her voice sweeter but still retaining an edge to it. "Behold, Sir Wyatt Staples, our allies, a wide collection of volatile, opportunistic men and women who would happily backstab each other for more influence and power. Such is the battlefield in which alliances are forged, bargains are made, deals are struck, and enemies are undone." "But aren't they loyal to House Astor and the Prince? The Marchioness—" Wyatt began, but Clara cut him off. "Amelia Finnegan is many things, but purely loyal is not one of them. She's a chess master, a manipulator, a deal maker, an opportunistic woman who plays her cards one at a time and keeps the rest as a closely guarded secret. She can be trusted to act within her own interests and that of her house, but within reason and always in service of House Astor and the Principality. She's ambitious and thirsts for power, but not without reason or outside her capabilities. That makes her predictable in the short term, which in turn gives her reliable strength, a strong bargaining position, and immediate diplomatic power. Many strong minor houses outside their banner houses have already flocked behind House Finnegan, hoping some of that power trickles down to them, and it will, as long as they play their part," Cynthia added. "More will follow and the influence will spread now that the prince has come to the light. She's a cunning woman, if nothing else." Wyatt winced at their tired tones. "It seems I have much to learn about being a noble." "Indeed," Clara agreed. "You must know who can mingle with and who you can't, who may be important and who you can ignore, who you must respect and whom you must treat with derision. Are you looking to establish an alliance, or are you simply prospecting for deals to be made? Will you be betrayed? Will you be the betrayer?" She sighed tiredly once more. "It is even more difficult when you are not desired to be present in the first place. On that note, congratulations, Wyatt. You followed my orders to the letter. Many harpies and wanton wenches tried to approach you, but only one had the nerve to come close. Her attempt was even commendable and practical. She'll be dangerous to anyone dumb enough to fall for her," Cynthia announced, ending with a dark chuckle. "Did you see them, Wyatt? Did you see the eyes set upon you like predators measuring the leap needed to catch their prey?" Wyatt shook his head as he shifted on his feet a little, the cool air of the night proving to be refreshing. "I didn't, actually. I was bored out of my mind for the most part. I caught a few glances and glares, but nothing else until the red-haired woman came along. What was that all about?" "A simple yet effective tactic. What sort of gentleman wouldn't try to aid a lady as she falls? Had you moved to aid her, she would have pressed herself onto you and tried to charm you with her beauty. She was indeed fetching." "An easy proposition," Clara replied, moving her left hand back and forth in front of her. "An introduction followed by a pointed remark on your physique, a subtle touch here, a clever, tasteful joke there, and the next thing you know, you are sharing a glass of wine sitting on a trap of her design." Wyatt frowned. "Not after I saw the way she looked at you two," he remarked seriously. "As you can imagine, I'm not the most sociable of people. You are the closest I've ever come to making friends since I was 7. He paused and looked back at the grand hall for a few seconds. Without your warning, Clara, I would have fallen for her tricks. But now that I know at least this much, I have no desire to get to know such women. Have you truly never tried to catch the eye of a fetching woman even when you were a commoner, Wyatt? Cynthia asked, eyebrow raised while Clara visibly relaxed her posture. Not really, he replied with a shrug. I've told you before, haven't I? I was planning to marry once I left the Royal Navy, and I got my pension and stipend assured. Truth be told, that was a maybe. The getting married and having kids part. Now that I'm a noble, I'm more inclined not to try too hard for that anymore. Do I have to marry? Is that like a law or something? It is entirely your decision, Wyatt. However, I would highly recommend waiting until this conflict is over to think about marriage and progeny. We could very well not survive, after all, said the princess. For now, let us focus on the issues at hand. Wyatt nodded. If that's the case, Clara, may I ask you something? Clara tilted her head slightly. Taking it for a yes, he continued. Why was everybody avoiding you? You're Princess Clara, an Astor. You should have been swarmed by suitors, unless you're married. Are you married? Come to think of it, how old are you? I am astonished at your lack of tact, Clara exclaimed, smiling and laughing for several moments while Cynthia face-palmed and slowly shook her head in disapproval. You do not ask a woman her age, Wyatt. Why not? It's just your age, Wyatt countered with a smirk. My cheeky, aren't you? Well, if you must truly know, my dear Wyatt, I am 23 years old and unmarried. She glanced at her best friend before leaning in. Cynthia is 22 and she's also unmarried. Clara! Exclaimed the now blushing blue-haired bodyguard. As for why we were avoided, Clara continued, ignoring her best friend's glare, that, I'm afraid, is something I cannot share with you in the open, Wyatt. I was planning to tell you in the future. Trust me on this. I could not, in good conscience, retain you at my side without you knowing my dark reputation within noble circles. Few are the houses that do not know of my deeds. Those who do not avoid me wish for my demise, she frowned. Clara the Reaper, they call me in hushed, wary voices, an insult earned and deserved. As I am Cynthia, the blood-rend, hand of my princess, her shield, her sword, Cynthia said, her embarrassment replaced by undying loyalty and fealty. Clara, the Reaper, Cynthia, the blood-rend, what did they do to deserve such distasteful nicknames? Wyatt asked himself as he stared at the two women for a long, silent moment. As unflattering as those nicknames are, that doesn't change who you are. What's more, what right do I have to judge you? You're my princess, and it is precisely because of that reason that you must promise me that you shall not judge us as your princess. We are Cynthia Winfield and Clara Astor, your friends, Wyatt Staples, if you'll have us as such at long last. A wave of dread flooded Wyatt's heart. A fear gripped his heart that had not made itself present for years came back to him. The idea that Clara and Cynthia were his friends was so ridiculous that he all but dismissed it. But now, he wasn't so sure anymore. But could he truly call them his friends? Royalty, nobility, and commoner upbringing be damned. He liked them a lot. He had opened up to them, revealed his past, and put his life on their hands, and in turn, they had trusted him and helped him in ways he could hardly understand in full. Not to mention, whenever I'm near them, I feel so at peace. I don't want to lose them, but I don't want to be close to them either. If they die like Wantum, Waldia, and Wisto, no, they're different. I'm different now. I can fight. They can fight. Maybe it'll be all right? The spark of hope within his chest exploded, and with a single nod and fearful smile, he uttered a single word. Yes. To his surprise, Clara beamed a sincere smile before extending her hand to him. Silently, Wyatt took it and squeezed her hand tightly. A moment later, they shook hands. Pleased to meet you, Clara Astor, he said, then turned to Cynthia, ending the exchange only to offer her his hand. She took it with an ample, proud, serene smile spread across her lips. Cynthia Winfield. Wyatt Staples, the two women said at the same time. The moment lasted only for a few seconds, but it was more than enough. Suddenly, Wyatt let out a chuckle. I guess that explains why you don't have any. The blonde princess and her blue-haired bodyguard blinked in confusion. Maids, Wyatt clarified. You don't have any, Clara. Is it because of your reputation? I do not enjoy having people on a leash when they do not wish to be near me, Wyatt, Clara answered, then smiled mischievously. You're the exception. I'm not going to let my elite fighter pilot go. Wyatt turned to Cynthia, shaking her head. Should I get to barking, then? He asked as he pointed at Clara with a thumb. The princess's reaction was immediate, as her mouth went agape and her cheeks blushed. For her part, Cynthia merely smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. Bark! Wyatt, I'll teach you to howl. Maybe then she'll be satisfied for once. Why, you... Shush! You... too! Clara hissed through clenched teeth and a forced, embarrassed smile. Much to her dismay, Cynthia and Wyatt laughed in response. A few seconds later, though, she joined them, and the three fell into a laughing spell that lasted until they could not laugh anymore. As enjoyable as this short moment of respite has been, I'm afraid we must return. Is our presence truly required? Cynthia asked in jest. I'm afraid so, Clara replied dejectedly, this time standing to her feet on her own accord. As the trio made their way back to the grand hall, Clara put on her facade once again and cleared her throat with a ladylike rasp. Is there something else you wish to ask me, Wyatt? Now that you mention it, yes, Wyatt replied. If you're so feared among nobles, why are your orders obeyed regardless? Would you disobey the order of a princess in their place? Clara countered. Wyatt went silent and cursed himself for asking such a stupid question. Clara, however, continued. They may fear me, detest me, wish for my demise even, but they are not stupid. As arrogant and self-righteous as most nobles are, they wouldn't dream of insulting me directly. They could make excuses to avoid their duties and distance themselves from me, the cowardly ones. But those savvy enough would take the opportunity to gain my favor through deeds. It fits me well. Empty, hollow words and promises of loyalty are worthless when they can't be fulfilled through actions. If their loyalty is conditional, or they seek to gain something from it, I welcome it all the same. Clara paused for a moment, taking in a deep breath as the faint sound of music reached their ears. As an Astor, Wyatt, I have power, reach, and wealth almost unparalleled. To gain my favor is to gain access to some of it, even if it is merely theoretical and in spirit. Furthermore, to stand in my good graces is to remain in my brother's line of interest. Now, apply that same logic to Cynthia, and now to yourself, my dear Wyatt. That's why she ordered me to remain at her side. Forget being a pawn in their schemes. I would just be a tool, a thing to be used in their favor and likely discarded when I'm no longer useful to them. All of it just to potentially whisper their words in Clara's ear. By using my mouth instead of their own, Wyatt concluded as fury manifested in his belly. He didn't care about being used. But the idea of being so stupid and ignorant as to be easily fooled by a damn blue blood just to get to Clara and Cynthia enraged him. Silently, he promised himself to never allow himself to get caught in such a trap for their sake, not his. As they re-entered the grand hall, a servant approached Wyatt from the left at a hurried pace. The man was holding a small pillow with a white gauntlet lying on top. For you, Sir Wyatt Staples, the servant said, offering the gauntlet. Eyes narrowed and fire still raging inside him, Wyatt pushed the pillow away without a moment's hesitation. A second later, Cynthia grabbed his shoulder as she glared at the servant. Before he could ask what was happening, a gasp echoed all around them, and the music stopped. Next, Salazar Reed, proud Marine captain, stepped forth as his footsteps echoed in the growing silence around the grand hall. I have offered the hand of peace, and it was rejected, he proclaimed, eyes set on the pilot. As tradition dictates, it is my right to request a duel in light of the spurn performed against my family and house. Honor dictates that the untimely death of my younger brother, Abacus Reed, must be avenged in a duel against the one responsible for it. Damnable snake, Cynthia snarled within Wyatt's mind. Fret not, Wyatt, I shall take care of him. If it is a formal duel he wants, then that's what he'll get. I'll make sure he joins his idiot brother in a single strike. Salazar Reed, may I ask what is the meaning of this unsightly outburst? Clara asked, unfazed. I believe you were forbidden from requesting a formal duel previously, yes? Or am I to assume you're so adamant in seeking your own death that you wish to accelerate it? Clara asked, her sweet voice contrasting the venomous barbs of her sharp, deadly tongue. This is no military matter anymore, Your Highness, Salazar replied. This is a matter of nobility, pride, honor, and righting wrongs. I formally request a shot-and-fence duel since Sir Wyatt Staples refused my offer of peace. I am within my right to cleanse the stain to both my honor and that dealt to my house through his incompetent actions that led to the death of my brother in the field of battle. Wyatt stared at the brown-haired man before turning to him in full. And if I refuse, then you shall be shamed as a coward. You, your name, your house, and your patron, Salazar replied, his face impassive and stoic. But Wyatt could see the smugness and the thirst for revenge in his eyes as clearly as the night sky. Accept his duel, Wyatt. I'll inform you what a shot-and-fence duel entails. Clever of him. I can almost respect that, Clara said in his mind, but her tone sent a shiver down his spine. Win or lose, he knew Salazar was going to pay for his trickery. Off in the distance, he could see the prince looking at the unfolding events with a neutral expression. But Juliana was visibly furious that one of her subordinates had dared to overstep her authority and orders in such a manner. Will honor be satisfied and this matter resolved once and for all? Wyatt asked, needing to be sure first. As tradition dictates, was Salazar's response. In that case, I accept, Wyatt answered, glaring at the man. The next 10 minutes went in a blur. Apparently, the second garden had a wide range of tracks, fields, and small arenas for such occasions. Also, to his surprise, Wyatt learned that there were a plethora of different types of duels between nobles. Some were purely intellectual, others were physical, and some were team-based, but the majority were one-on-one duels that were typically non-fatal. Such was the case of the shot-and-fence duel. It was fairly simple to understand, though to him it made no sense. But duelists would be given a single-fire pistol, modeled and retrofitted to look like the ancient flintlock from humanity's distant past on Earth. The gun would be loaded by a referee with a single hard rubber round bullet that, on impact, would leave a colorful stain where it hit. The duel itself had several rules that had to be followed and obeyed to the letter. 1. The referee would load the guns to make sure no tampering was done. 2. The duelists would stand back-to-back on a small, narrow field. 3. Once the pistols were loaded, the referee would chant to 10, and each duelist would take a step forth. 4. At the order of the referee, they would stop, turn, and raise their weapons. 5. During the length of the duel, the duelists were forbidden from talking. 6. On the count of 3, the duelists would take aim and fire. 7. If the shots missed or struck the opponent in a non-fatal area, then the fencing would take place with blunted swords. 8. Victory was achieved by the first to score a would-be lethal strike, or if the opponent surrendered. In case of a draw, the duel would end all the same. Any violation would result in the immediate disqualification and loss of the perpetrator, such as shooting ahead of time, striking with violent lethal intent, or speaking out of turn. An audience gathered within moments, eager to see a duel play out. As he stood back-to-back against Salazar Reed, Wyatt could hear the murmurs and sordid chuckles leaving the mouths of those waiting for the duel to start. He was not a gambling man, but he was certain bets were being placed, likely against him. I wonder how many of them wished to see me lose. Would it shame Clara's name? Would they think less of me if I lost? Wyatt asked himself, as Hecatock Finnegan was selected as the referee since he was, supposedly, an expert in the field. On this most glorious evening and in the presence of our most beloved Liege, the prince, a duel shall dictate the honor of 2 houses, the challenger, Baron Salazar Reed of the most esteemed House Reed. The challenged, Sir Wyatt Staples, Knight Banneret of House Astor representing his nascent household. Do you understand and abide by the rules of this duel? I do, Wyatt and Salazar replied simultaneously. Under my watchful eye and by ageless tradition, do you swear to accept the result of this duel and let grievances die in peace? Hecatock asked. I swear, came the reply. Then by the authority invested in me and under the righteous eyes of His Majesty, the Prince, Her Majesty, Princess Clara Astor, and our beloved Marchioness Amelia Finnegan, let this duel commence. Hecatock announced and turned around to give the audience a humble bow before picking up a pistol and loading it with an inch-thick black rubber ball. He removed the safety, aimed it at a target dummy a few paces away, and fired. The rubber pellet was expelled at a considerable speed with pure air pressure, and it hit the dummy with a hard whacking sound, leaving a considerable red mark on its torso. He then placed the gun on the table and picked another one, loading it, and then did the same with a third pistol. He handed Salazar his pistol first and then to Wyatt. When Wyatt took it, he was surprised that it weighed more than he thought it would. "Duelists," Hekatok called, "your pistols have been loaded. May the best man win. Shot at 10 paces." The pilot took a step every time Hekatok called out a number until he called out the last one. 10! Halt! Turn around, now! Finally, face to face, Wyatt could see Salazar's in full detail. While his expression was serious and focused, Salazar's was a pale comparison, barely able to contain his rage and desire to claim a victory he thought was owed to him. He wanted his life when he was a commoner, but now that he was a noble, humiliation was a worse fate in his delusional opinion. "Raise your weapons!" Wyatt obeyed diligently but cursed internally as the uneven weight of the pistol and its bloated design made it difficult to aim properly. "Remove safety lock! Aim!" Hekatok called and raised his right arm, holding it there to build up tension. "On my mark! 3!" Wyatt took in a deep breath. 2! His sight was focused on his target, taking aim as best he could with the bothersome pistol. 1! His entire body stiffened and his finger was set against the trigger. "Fire!" The command was given and the triggers were pulled. Salazar Reed was a good shot. He was not only a Marine but a high-ranking officer, but his thirst for revenge had made him sloppy, unconfused, and overconfident. How could he, a member of House Reed, lose to a man who had been a mere commoner no longer than a few weeks ago? His shot hit Wyatt, but instead of striking his heart, it struck his left shoulder, leaving a green stain on it. For his part, Wyatt winced at the impact of the rubber bullet. Even with his armor on, it hurt, and he was sure a bruise would form by the morning. But the pain was but a shadow compared to the joy he was experiencing at that precise moment. His face remained unchanged, refusing to show his emotions, but internally he was smiling with gratification. Aiming the pistol was difficult, but he was a good marksman for a reason. His shot landed perfectly, right between Salazar Reed's eyes, painting half his face in a blue stain. The Baron blinked in confusion several times before angrily removing the substance covering his face. Already a deep red bruise was forming where the bullet impacted his face. Suddenly, all balance left him as he stumbled over his feet and fell backward, trying to get up but unable to even roll over. "Winner, Sir Wyatt Staples," Hekatok declared a few seconds after Salazar hit the ground. Polite, weak applauses followed his declaration as well as several murmurings. "Can I speak and move now?" Wyatt asked. Hekatok nodded and he walked up to him, handing the pistol back. Then he moved to Salazar, who was now aided by 2 of his servants. Still on his knees, the brown-haired man looked up at Wyatt, his face smeared with blue, and the center of impact was growing swollen and bruised. "Will this suffice your thirst for honor?" "Yes, as tradition dictates," Salazar replied, ashamed and defeated. He peeled his gaze away, unable to hold his any longer. Satisfied, Wyatt turned away and walked away in silence. Once he reached Cynthia, the prince stood up. "Now that this short-lived entertainment is over, let the feast commence." By the prince's command, the audience dispersed, but not before the prince, Princess Clara, and Marchioness Amelia walked in first, followed closely by their servants and chosen entourage. Back at their tables, Wyatt couldn't help but notice that many nobles, particularly several ladies, were now sending furtive, predatory glances directed at him. He paid them no attention as he stood his ground. His only lamentation was that he wouldn't be allowed to eat until after the festivities were over, and the night proved to be a long one. Finnegan Grand Palace Medical Wing. Fortunately for everyone, no further disturbances made themselves present to interrupt the night. For Wyatt, to call what he saw a feast felt wrong. The amount of dishes presented was absurd, in his opinion. It also genuinely infuriated him that most nobles tasted a dish only to ignore the rest of it before jumping to the next one. All that effort, all that food dismissed so easily. Then again, it wasn't his place to say anything about it, and he had his fill once Clara decided to retire for the night. A dozen more ladies and a few intrepid lords had tried to approach him, but his indifference or a pointed glare from Cynthia sent them away within moments. Sleep came quickly, and when he woke up to the call of a Royal Marine, he was escorted to the medical wing. The medical areas of the Noir Navio and the Exalted Virtue were impressive, but they were tiny and cramped compared to what the Finnegans had at their disposal. To merely enter the area, they had to go through a sterilization chamber. Once inside, the air smelled like medicine and alcohol. The medics, nurses, physicians, and doctors were busy at work tending to patients, running physical tests, injecting inoculations, CRISPR, and preparing nobles for surgery. That's when he remembered that he was going to get 4 new implants, and he shuddered in discomfort within his armor. What is this? Have I discovered a weakness? Wyatt turned around to find Cynthia and her sister, Juliana, leaning against what appeared to be the registry. Cynthia, as always, wore her red armor, while Juliana wore her officer's uniform but without the medals she'd displayed last night. He bowed respectfully before replying. "Greetings, Commander Juliana." "Lady Cynthia," he said, and stepped closer while the Royal Marine stuck close to him, wearing his armor that looked similar to Cynthia's, just in black with purple stripes across it, and the crest of House Astor on his right shoulder, and the banner of the Royal Marines, a simple silver human skull with a raven standing on it emblazoned on his left. It occurred to him that he had never seen the Royal Marines wear their actual armor until now, probably in an attempt to keep themselves concealed. "So, are you afraid, Wyatt?" Juliana asked. "Very," Wyatt confessed without hesitation. "After my previous experience adapting to the Dulaxis, Kinator, and Ontoro implants, I'm not too enthused about these 4 new implants," he explained. "Oh, any reason in particular? Poor medical advice and treatment aside?" Juliana asked, remarking that he had been poorly informed after getting his first implants, which caused him more discomfort than necessary. "Truthfully, I do not like being in pain, nor do I enjoy causing it. I can withstand it, but I much prefer not to endure it. However, thanks to the implants I got, I was able to fight the Drazan and survive my wounds. If I have to experience more pain, then so be it." "But you aren't looking forward to it?" Cynthia asked, arms crossed. Wyatt nodded. "I've seen firsthand the amount of pain and damage you can withstand, Wyatt. If you can grow stronger, then what is going through some more pain? Trust me, you are about to experience an entirely different level of pain. Kill me. Kill me now. If you hate me so, just kill me," Wyatt thought with mounting dread, his face paling. Juliana chuckled deeply. "Be nice, Cynthia. Even if you are speaking truthfully, there's no need to scare our valiant knight in such a way." Placing a hand on his shoulder, she continued as she stared into his frightened brown eyes. "Now in you go. You need to get a complete physical examination and a genetic sampling to make sure your new implants and enhancements won't be rejected. It's rare, but it can happen. Clara wouldn't forgive me if her private pilot died on the operating table now, would she? Inconveniences aside, I wonder how loud you'll scream, Wyatt." "May I refuse to receive these implants?" Wyatt asked in a last-ditch attempt to escape what was promising to be an excruciatingly painful experience. "What do you think?" Juliana replied with a predatory smile. "Loyalty is its own reward, Sir Staples." "Are the restraints necessary?" Wyatt asked, not bothering to hide the fear lacing his words. Tight, flexible restraints were latched to his ankles, wrists, thighs, shins, upper arms, forearms, and waist, keeping him bound to a horizontal operating table, unable to move except for his head, fingers, and toes. His arms were wide open while his legs were lightly spread apart. All in all, he felt even more exposed than during his recovery time in the Noir Navio. He only wore a pair of medical tail trousers that covered his crotch and nothing more. As his head rested on an amazingly comfortable and soft surface, he veered his attention to a window where Cynthia, Juliana, and, to his surprise, Redford, watched the unfolding events with an unreadable, serious expression. "I'm afraid so," replied one of the doctors tending to his restraints, while 2 other doctors and several assistants checked and rechecked readings on several different machines that were alien to the black-haired pilot. "For your own safety, we can't allow you to move more than what we need." "Couldn't have you knock me out instead?" Wyatt asked, more than a little annoyed. A portion of local anesthesia shall be applied as well as lessen the impact of your pain receptors. Sadly, the procedure requires an active, aware mind. Otherwise, there is a high chance that your body will reject the implants, causing major mutations, malformities, or crippling you for the rest of your short life. Worse yet, it could prove fatal nearly instantly via total organ failure, your heart collapsing, complete lung collapse, or brain hemorrhaging. Only less than 0.05% of the procedures end up in failure when the patient is awake, than the overwhelming 68% failure rate when the patient is, as you put it, knocked out, the doctor explained professionally. Wyatt had the sneaking suspicion that every doctor and assistant present said or heard that same explanation several times a day. Still, that did nothing to calm his racing heart. "You may rest easy, Sir Wyatt Staples. Your physical examination was approved and your genetic sampling showed nothing outside the ordinary. A higher than usual likelihood of developing cancer, a relatively average tendency to develop vasovagal syncope, an allergy to silver, and nothing else worth noting. All in all, perfectly normal. Your allergy can be treated with inoculations, and low-grade CRISPR shall remove your minor genetic imperfections," the doctor explained with a dullness that was betrayed by his words. Before Wyatt had a chance to process the information he'd been given, the doctor turned to one of his assistants. "Is the procedure ready to commence?" "The AI has run several thousands of simulations and reports nothing out of the ordinary. The equipment is in perfect working order. Everything that we need is ready for use, Doctor." "Patient's vitals are strong and steady. The bruise on his left shoulder is of no concern. Compatibility expected, 90.999%, another assistant announced. "Ready to commence on your command, Doctor." "Let us begin in that case," the doctor said and nodded at his colleagues before turning to Wyatt. "The procedure shall commence in 1 minute, Sir Wyatt Staples. Do not fret, your life is safe within our hands." "I very much would rather that not be the case," Wyatt screamed in his mind as he grew agitated. What implants are you going to pun in me?" he asked nervously. "From easiest to most difficult, Sir Wyatt. You shall first receive the secretor implant, followed shortly after by the trinumeter implants and its enhancing genetic tampering. Immediately after, you will receive the Tier 2 Weave-Thew implant. I must admit, if your physical condition was not as impressive as it is now, or had the Kinetor and Dulaxis shown any minor sign of rejection, I would have protested against you receiving any tier of the Weave-Thew implant. As it stands, however, feel free to scream and writhe as much as you desire," the doctor explained, as his helmet's visor was suddenly sealed. "Wait, Commander Juliana wasn't joking?" "How much is this going to hurt?" Wyatt thought as fear threatened to become panic. The only thing that kept him from screaming and begging to stop the procedure was the presence of Cynthia, reminding him why he was getting those implants in the first place. "For Clara. Do it for Clara and the Principality. It won't be as bad as I imagine," he said to himself, swallowing nervously. "Finally, you shall receive the most generous and impressive gift of Commander Juliana Winfield today present to observe the results of this procedure," the doctor said, bowing his head in the direction of the window where the Winfield sisters and Redford watched in complete silence. Juliana seemingly heard what the doctor said as she gave him a solid nod. Wyatt was about to ask what it was when the doctor pulled back and joined his fellow doctors next to a big, cylindrical white machine, as white as the rest of the room. Wires came out of the machine through screen ports that connected with the visors of the 3 doctors, and their bodies stiffened. Much to his dismay, the equipment that had so far remained a mystery around him came to life, splitting open to reveal several robotic limbs and instruments, of which the vast majority ended in thin, gleaming needles. "Phase 1 starting," one assistant announced, and over 24 of those robotic limbs moved in closer to the bound pilot. Wyatt closed his eyes and clenched his teeth a second before he felt the cold metal of the needles piercing his skin at various locations, though most of them, he noticed, focused on his chest, neck, and abdomen. He then felt a stinging pain as something was injected and his entire body clenched tightly. A few seconds later, he opened his eyes as the limbs moved back, discarding the used needle only to be replaced by a new one almost instantly. "Phase 1 completed. Awaiting permission to commence Phase 2, another assistant announced. Almost instantly, two other mechanical arms ending in a nozzle moved closer to Wyatt and sprayed a small dose of an orange chemical over his armpits. Unwilling to talk, Wyatt only observed the procedure take place and soon felt lighter than usual. His whole body started to tingle, but he could still wriggle his toes and move his fingers. The sensations were dull, though. This doesn't feel anything like the procedure I went through before. In the Exalted Virtue, all they did was spray me, cut me up a little, seal it with biofoam, and apply a few injections before sending me away, thought the pilot, as he compared the two experiences, and further increasing his dislike toward the whole concept of getting implants and other enhancements, no matter how useful they ended up being in the end. Phase 2 commencing, the assistant announced, and 4 limbs moved closer. 2 of them made a quick cut on his armpits, but no blood spilled out. A second later, a small centimeter-wide in diameter silver-colored pellet was introduced into his flesh, and his wounds were quickly sealed by an application of a quick-acting biofoam. Secretor implant installed, awaiting permission to start Phase 3. I wonder what does it do, Wyatt pondered curiously, making a mental note to ask Cynthia later. Seconds passed, and all he could do was blink and wait for what was coming next. His wait came to an end when a dozen of those arms approached him yet again, but stopped a mere inch away from him. Then another set of limbs approached, 2 of which, he noticed, carried a sort of capsule with them and a larger syringe coupled with several hair-thin, wriggling tentacles. Phase 3 commencing, first trinumeter phase underway, the assistant announced. A second later, Wyatt watched as 2 of the arms equipped with a scalpel approached his chest. He clenched his teeth as a stinging pain erupted in his mind. With quick, precise motions, a wide section across his left pectoral was cut open and pried open by 2 additional arms. The pain was intense, but nowhere near as terrible as he thought watching his skin and flesh being cut open and split apart. He groaned in pain, and his face contorted in response to one of the capsule-holding limbs approaching as the scalpels cut more until he was able to see his ribcage. Panic threatened to set in as vivid images from his past re-entered his mind. The mechanical limbs morphed before his very eyes, turning from metal and wires to the fleshy tentacles of the Drazen, eager to turn his body into their precious feed. His breathing was ragged, his teeth clenched as hard as he could manage, and he tried to move, but his bindings kept him in place while the sedatives sapped much of his strength away. The capsule-holding limbs suddenly moved forth, inserting the syringe between his exposed ribs, followed by the small, coiling tentacles. Gah! Wyatt gasped, mouth hanging open as he felt something grip his heart. It was an odd, terrifying sensation that chilled him to the bone. Then again, no one can truly be prepared to have something move around their chest and shove their beating heart out of the way. Moments later, he felt something wet but solid make contact with his heart, something fleshy, something warm. He let out a scream of pain as his heart skipped several beats, and he slammed the back of his head against the table, discovering why it was so comfortable and soft in the process. A long, glacially slow minute passed until the syringe retracted and his heart was released. The limbs were quick to act, sealing the wound with copious amounts of high-quality biofoam. Within moments, his gaping wound was gone, replaced by a barely perceptible scar that would end up disappearing in a few weeks. Before Wyatt could bask in a momentary relief, the entire table moved until he was now in a vertical position, and a section of the table opened, revealing his back. Secondary heart successfully implanted. Nominal readings. Commencing second trinumeter phase. A wave of dread filled his chest, but there was nothing he could do about it. The process repeated itself, but on his back. He couldn't see it, and he was thankful he couldn't see it as the pain was twice as bad as what he'd experienced mere moments prior. Another scream of pain escaped his lips and his hands clenched into fists while his entire body froze while the other capsule-holding limb moved behind him and inserted another fleshy thing within him. Again, another eternally long minute passed until the syringe retreated and the patch of flesh was sealed back, the biofoam washing away the pain and immense discomfort he had experienced. Auxiliary lungs successfully implanted. Nominal readings, no deviations noticed. Estimated time until full integration of both phases, 5 days, commencing third trinumeter phase. the assistant announced, and the table closed the gap behind him before returning to its original position. Wyatt was unable to speak or even think straight by this point, but his eyes searched for the view window and quickly found it, his gaze landing on the impassive expressions of the two commanders and the blue-haired woman he now considered his friend. A part of him wanted to curse them for making him go through such a horrible experience, but his more logical part realized that they more than likely had gone through similar operations, and likely more and worse than what he was going through presently, so he couldn't hold it against them. If anything, seeing them there, especially Cynthia and Redford, helped him. Not by much, but it was better than having to face them alone like he had during the first set of implants he received. When he saw a new set of 12 mechanical limbs hover above his torso, he clenched his teeth again. Just in time, too, as the needles extended and then simultaneously pierced his body across various points. Then he felt it. A hot, acid-burning liquid was being injected into his body. It quickly spread across his chest, back, spine, neck, mouth, and stomach. By all that was good and just, his stomach was on fire. He let out a long scream of pain as he banged his head against the table repeatedly, groaning and spitting for several moments until the burning began to die down and the needles were removed, giving him a much-needed breather. If it hurts this much like this, it must be unbearable without anesthesia. As bad as this is, it could be much, much worse. Oh no, Wyatt thought, his eyes going wide as a terrible sudden realization manifested itself at the forefront of his mind. The doctor warned me that the third implant was going to be the worst. Genetic equalizer successfully supplied. Nominal readings, no risk of mutation or rejection was detected. Phase 3 was successful. Awaiting permission to begin Phase 4, an assistant announced. The wait lasted mere seconds. Commencing Phase 4, Tier 2 weave-through implant. As one, every mechanical limb moved and twisted around except for the capsule-holding limbs that moved away, their purpose now fulfilled. Worse, the needles were gone, replaced by dozens of tiny, thin, coiling mechanical tentacles. Over 30 of those mechanical limbs stood over across his entire body, with 2 of them set against each side of his neck, and the rest a mere breath away from brushing against his skin. Wyatt was breathing hard and fast, his eyes moving frantically from one of those accursed metallic limbs to another as they remained still, as if taunting him. The silent, glaring standoff lasted for mere seconds until the limbs broke the uneasy truce and all but jammed the small, hair-thin tentacles against his body. The tiny things were cold, and they immediately began to piece and burrow themselves beneath his skin, going deeper and spreading wider as they did. The sensation was entirely uncomfortable, but not as painful as he feared, and then they stopped. A cold but almost pleasant sensation replaced the discomfort, confusing the black-haired pilot. That wasn't so bad, he muttered to himself, relieved. Either an assistant heard him at that moment, or the universe truly hated him for some reason and loved seeing him suffer. Weaving! Initiated! An assistant announced loudly and firmly. Pain. Otherworldly, searing, ungodly pain erupted all across his body. Wyatt's mouth went wide, nearly unhinging his jaw as a cry of pure white noise left his throat, unable to scream as his eyes filled with tears. His entire body tensed, but it did him no good. He could feel something slithering and squirming and moving beneath his flesh, piercing his muscles, tearing and reforming his tendons, and latching to his joints. Thousands of tiny stabs happened for every second that passed, slowly spreading across his whole body from his scalp all the way down to the tip of his toes. His ligaments were cut, stretched, sewn together, and then twisted over and over again. With what little mental clarity he still managed to cling on to, his cynical mind couldn't help but compare what the machines were doing to him as anything but a morbid version of knitting. Only that in this case, his flesh was the yarn. He finally was able to scream, gasping for air and unable to move. His entire body was on fire, white noise rang in his ears, and his vision blurred with hallucinations and tears. His mind unraveled in turn without driving him into madness. Wyatt didn't know how long the procedure lasted, but to him, it felt like an eternity enduring such agony. But as the pain began to diminish, his screams eventually turned to groans and huffs, eventually turning into ragged, rasping breaths. The wriggling tentacles inside him had finished their job and were now retreating, sending a few last electrifying stabs of agony across his body until, at long last, they pulled out of his body. Gathering whatever strength he had left, Wyatt looked down at his body, expecting to see himself smeared in blood. To his surprise, he only found a few trickles of blood quickly cleaned away by two assistants. Aside from the stinging pain still lingering under his skin, he felt weak and was struggling to stay awake. Weaving completed without incidents. Tier 2 Weave-Through implant installed. Estimated time until full adaptation, 7 days. Recommend entombing the patient for 3 days within a cytostimulating pod for faster recovery and adaptation time. Procedure completed. Awaiting permission to administer the eye gene enhancement. Wyatt had paid little attention to what the assistants were saying before. His mind had already adapted to the idea of receiving the implants and enhancements that were now within him. But whatever the gift from Juliana Winfield and House Winfield as a whole was, it never crossed his mind that it could be a full-on genetic tailoring enhancement. He had never thought about it in depth, but after he became a knight banneret, a noble, and with him being a lieutenant in the Royal Navy, he knew it was only a matter of time before the need to upgrade his eyes arose. Truth be told, he had no desire to have his eye ripped out and replaced by cybernetic eyes, no matter how many advantages they offered. He could live without having direct neural access to the network since he never used it before. With the revelation given by the assistant, a part of him was thankful that he'd get to keep his eyes, but another greater part of him was concerned with how much this gift had cost Commander Juliana. He knew there were different types of cybernetic eyes available, geared toward wealth ranges, noble ranks, job requirements, and a myriad of other little details thanks to Commander Redford's tutelage. Despite their rather heavy cost in credits, there was a reason why cybernetic eyes were by far the most used by the nobility at large. Not only were such augmentations reserved only for the nobility, but few were the houses and individual nobles that could afford such a gene enhancement. "Permission acquired," said the assistant, breaking his momentary stupor. "Initiating procedure," he announced with not an insignificant amount of reverence in his voice. Even for doctors working directly for House Finnegan, witnessing such a treatment had to be a rarity. Or at least that was what Wyatt thought, as a new wave of dread surged within his chest when two new mechanical limbs armed with long, oddly shaped needles slowly approached from each side of his head. Suddenly, a third limb appeared above him and latched itself against his face, leaving only his eyes and nose exposed and forcing his head to remain still. He tried to move, but nothing budged in the slightest. "Remain calm, Sir Wyatt," said one of the assistants. "This is relatively painless, but you must remain still. It'll be over soon." Wyatt embraced the command, desperate to find a semblance of order amid his terror and dread-fueled panic. He stopped fighting, obeying the command given even as his breathing became faster and ragged. A whirring noise caught his attention, but since he couldn't turn his head anymore, he was unable to find what was producing such a noise. His question was answered a second later when the objects he thought were needles pressed against his temples. A twisting, burning sensation assaulted him, and he closed his eyes tightly, clenching his teeth as something was drilling inside his skull at a steady pace. It didn't last for more than 10 seconds, but when it ended and the drills withdrew, something long and flexible replaced them. He then felt two weak, cold needles stab something within his cranium before an equally cold, stinging liquid was injected into him. The process lasted for several seconds until it suddenly stopped, and the thing retreated, replaced by something else that chipped at his skull, followed moments later by an application of biofoam to the drilled areas. Eye gene enhancement successfully applied. Nominal, wait. Readings are well within safety parameters, but it appears that there is a chance of developing a benign mutation, entirely aesthetic according to the AI predictions. Monitoring this development is advised. Integration readings are all within nominal parameters, awaiting further authorization to move the patient into either a room or a cytostimulating pod. For the first time since the procedure began, the voice of Commander Redford broke through unseen speakers. Authorization granted to place Lieutenant Wyatt Staples inside a cytostimulating pod. Authorization received. Moving patient now, an assistant said before the doctors unhooked themselves from the station and the mechanical limb released Wyatt's face, letting him breathe normally again. He wanted to ask what they meant by benign mutation, but he was simply too tired to care. His entire body, from his skin to his bone marrow, felt incredibly hot, as if he was suffering from the worst fever he'd ever experienced, but without any of the symptoms denoting he was sick. As the assistants carried him away and the doctors congratulated themselves on a successful procedure, he searched for the window and found the two commanders speaking with each other. Cynthia, on the other hand, offered him a sincere smile and nod. That was almost enough to make the pain he went through worth it. Almost, he thought, giving her his best smirk before he was moved out of the room. Princess Clara's quarters, an hour later. As Cynthia approached the temporary quarters of her best friend and princess, she noted the 4 of the Royal Marines under her command standing guard. They gave her a pointed nod as she walked past them, returning their kind gesture with one of her own. The doors opened and she entered without delay. Once inside and the doors closing behind her, she found her princess sitting before a desk while her fingers moved over a keyboard, her eyes glued to the screen in front of her. Sitting a few meters to Clara's right was Captain Milcades eating a Royal Marine ration bar. The white hair of the captain, so common among the Royal Marines, was short and properly trimmed. The 6'5" man stood up from his seat, still munching on his food, and saluted her. His eyes, orange and fiery, showed an amicable air to him, hiding the efficient and always reliable, ruthless man that the 27-year-old captain could become within a moment's notice. "Milcades, I see that your assignment was a boring one," Cynthia joked, smiling at her old friend. "Hardly. Ensuring the safety of our beloved princess while you're away is an honor, Cynthia," Milcades replied with a half-full mouth. Swallowing, he continued. "So, how did it go?" "He screamed more than I thought, but cried only when the Weave-Thew implant got going," Cynthia replied, crossing her arms. "All in all, he endured it better than I thought he would. Most people pass out during the Weave-Thew procedure. With his aversion toward pain into account, it is impressive." Milcades nodded. "I find it more impressive that he has not tried to escape your training, Cynthia. Heard that you were treating him like a rag doll." Cynthia smirked before elbowing her friend's side. "His melee capabilities leave much to be desired, this is true, but he learns quickly and adapts at a rate that leaves me baffled. After he recovers, I will be careful in measuring and guiding him through the adaptation process. After that, I shall see how well he does with a sword, but I hold no great expectations in that regard." "Looks to me that he's a marksman. Dueling pistols are so poorly designed it is criminal. And yet he managed to land a hit right between Salazar's eyes? I would love to see him in action with a proper rifle or gun." Milcades replied, then hummed deeply. "Perhaps I should give him some sniper training? Or maybe test his capabilities as an infiltrator?" He pondered, glancing at Clara's back. "One step at a time, Milcades," Clara replied with her jovial, gentle tone. "While he recovers, I must finalize the details of our mission first. Cynthia, did everything go nicely? I would have assisted myself, but duty calls, more so in these tumultuous times." "There were no issues with the procedures or the implants except for the eye gene enhancement," Cynthia replied, frowning slightly. "A minor chance for a benign mutation was registered. Other than that, it was a successful and ordinary process." "A benign mutation?" Clara asked, her fingers and attention never diverting from her task at hand. "Cosmetic in nature. If it happens, it may slightly alter the original coloration of his eyes," Cynthia replied. "My sister and Redford were betting on if it'll take or not." "As long as Wyatt is in no harm, it'll be acceptable," Clara remarked. "Speaking of your sister, Cynthia, has Juliana punished Salazar Reed?" "Not yet, but she plans to. She first seeks to talk with Vice Admiral Vashakati Reed about this incident. Although, I'm certain he shall be reaching her first. Salazar was thoroughly humiliated by Wyatt's victory," Cynthia said, frowning. "Clever of him to ask for a non-lethal honor duel. More clever of him to use a peace gauntlet." "Yes," Clara replied. "It seems I will also need to teach Wyatt the finer points of nobility once he recovers. Was he sent to the cytostimulating pod?" "Redford gave his authorization," Cynthia replied while Milcades continued to eat in silence. "Splendid," the princess said, and finally her fingers stopped, but her attention remained focused on the screen. Milcades, ensure that the Nornavio remains isolated and only the additional cargo and personnel I approve of are to be dispatched to it. I will not suffer any traitor or potential spy within my ship. At your command, Clara, Milcades replied in a solemn tone. We shall depart Macha within a week. As much as it pains me to leave my brother dearest here, we have our roles to play. Our path shall take us first to House Ferentis, and we shall convince them to side with my brother, the prince. Their industrial and shipbuilding capabilities will be needed. After that, we will seek to cripple the Caiston lineage, depriving my uncle of his most loyal banner house. If possible, we shall remove Andrew Caiston first, said the blonde princess. What about the rest of House Caiston and their branching bloodlines? Cynthia asked. We shall refrain from purging them entirely, Clara answered, unless they are stupid enough to incur my wrath. If they do, I shall stand at your side, my princess, Cynthia replied. So shall we, my princess, Milcades seconded. Clara let out a tired sigh. Let us hope, then, that the stupidity and cowardice of Tamarin Caiston are not hereditary.